If the Dutch government is bringing the police and the military to bear on the farmers, why are the police and the military cooperating? Because my sense, for example, in Canada was that among the military and the police, there was a tremendous amount of support for the Canadian truckers, fundamentally, because they're the same people, all things considered. And nonetheless, the military and the police did their betters' bidding, which is, of course, what should happen in a state that's still functioning properly. But in Holland, to what degree are the police and the military, as far as you can tell, aligned with the government compared to what degree are they aligned in a more true sense with the farmers and the fishermen and the dock workers?
So on a lower level, what I've noticed yesterday, for example, at the protest as well, the police officers that we have encountered were all incredibly friendly, and you could just tell that they loved what we were doing. I think that is sadly the reality of our police forces. The officer on the street supports the farmers, but the top level listens to the establishment. And obviously those are the people that call the shots. And so younger generation police officers are afraid to lose their job if they stand up against it. And obviously you only need a couple of really brave and courageous souls to make some good shots in those cases with the protests. But sadly, I think the majority just listens to whomever gives them orders. And the top layer of the police forces is in the pocket of the state.
What would you suggest that people who are watching and listening in the Netherlands, what is it that they could do to make their concerns known, and how could they express support for the Dutch farmers? And the same thing applies on a broader scale. There's going to be people all over the world watching this podcast. What would you recommend to people who are watching and listening so that they can stay properly apprised of what's actually going on in the Netherlands, given that the legacy media is corrupt beyond comprehension? Like, how do people inform themselves properly, and what would the Dutch farmers want to see and need to see in terms of support from people around the world?
So I think that the international support has been incredibly important to the Dutch farmers because they've seen, that the world is watching, and that they understand that this is something that will eventually, not just stay a Dutch issue, but will spread and could affect others, other nations, other people around the world. So that support has been incredibly vital. What the Dutch people can do, first of all, they can go and vote the current parties out of at least the Senate. That would be incredibly important, of course.
In favor of who? In favor of who?
Well, true opposition parties. There are a few left. I will not sit here and tell people who to vote for, but I would say if any of these parties are in favor of negotiating about the nitrogen crisis or expropriating our farmers, you shouldn't vote for them. That's very simple. And I think
that's a losing strategy to negotiate.
The power of symbolism is very, very important, very strong. It doesn't take much to take your Dutch flag, put it on your window, and turn it upside down. Signify that you are a nation in distress. It's become the symbol for the Dutch farmers' protest. For farmers
Canada
to see
too,
that,
on the trucker side.
Exactly. I think for farmers to see that, that's a silent sign of support. I think will make them feel like they're not alone.
The Canadian farmers, they keep the Dutch farmers, Canadian truckers, Dutch farmers keep bringing them up. They did yesterday again. Guys on stage and whatnot. The Canadian farmer example then spread to America, which I went with our American truckers all the way from California to DC. I rode all the way across the country with them. And now the Dutch farmers talk about the Canadians. That spark was important. Just note. I'll leave it at that.
Courage is contagious. So
it is.
That's really what we need right now.
Canadians led the way on that one, and it was really an important spark.
There were a lot of Canadian flags yesterday at the rally too.
There were.
Yeah,
there were.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because they understand that we're all in the same boat.
The world's upside down when Dutch farmers are protesting and Canadian truckers take the political lead. I mean, something's seriously gone astray. Well, first of all, when Canada is even interesting and, on the political scene. And I would say the same thing in some sense about Holland. I mean, there are few countries I've ever visited that are more deeply civilized in the most positive possible sense than Holland. It's an absolutely amazing country. An incredible balance of beauty and freedom and order, and that's so difficult to attain, and broad public trust and all within that great acceptance of wide difference and wide range of individual potential for action. It's an amazing thing that you people have accomplished, as people like Ayaan Hirsi Ali have been at pains to point out. And the same can be said on a somewhat lesser scale of Canada. But then when you see the people who are in fact the competent, hardworking backbone on the manual labor and productivity side, the truckers and the farmers rise up and say, you know, government has become so intolerable that we can no longer do our job, then everyone who's awake in the least, whether they're on the right or the left, should wake up and think, oh my God, you know, the people who normally do nothing but put their nose to the grindstone are complaining. Perhaps something seriously wrong. Well, there is something seriously wrong. And if the Dutch farmers lose, man, there's going to be hell to pay, because they're courageous in the extreme, competent in the extreme, and true canaries in the coal mine. And I think the most likely outcome at the moment, sad to say, is that the Dutch government will keep grinding away on in its incremental fashion, and it will pick them off one by one, and they'll reduce the damn Dutch farmer population to 50%, devastate the agricultural sector, and that'll produce shock waves of dismay across the across the Western world among those who might otherwise object, and it'll also produce a terrible catastrophe on the food and tyranny front. So this is a watershed moment as far as I'm concerned. If this were a lost war, I would not even be here. They can definitely win, but they have to go offensive. They will absolutely lose if they stay defensive. And you talked about the Polderkultur, which is the culture of negotiation, and which the anthropologists who specialized in information war, they will find these weaknesses in the culture, like the Polderkultur, which is, you know, find compromise. That's the same in Japan. That's the same with Canadians. The strongest part of the Canadian culture and the Dutch culture and the Japanese culture is it's highly civilized. That makes you highly vulnerable to savages. Well, Michael, you know, there are simulations of this sort of thing that have been played out by biologists on large scale, trying to account for the persistence of narcissism and psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and so forth, that manipulative attitude and often manipulative people. And what happens is, if you produce a population of people who do nothing but cooperate, they can cooperate like mad, and that can be extraordinarily productive. But if you drop a single shark into the tank, a tank full of cooperators, the shark takes everything. And so, on the one hand, that willingness to negotiate and agree can be the driver of civil society. But the problem is that it opens up a niche for the manipulative psychopaths to play a winner-take-all game. And they do that precisely by exploiting the weak part of cooperation. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's why I don't mind in this day and age, you know, where evil is so prevalent, to be called a radical. I don't mind to be called a radical in the fight against evil. And I think that is really the fight that we're fighting right now. So to be moderate in the face of evil, it means that evil will win. And our country, thank you for your kind words about my country, because I completely, full-heartedly agree with you. We have such a rich history. We're such a beautiful nation. And yesterday at the rally, when I was giving my speech, I said this as well. The fact that we have a government that has launched an attack on its own people, you know, that has turned on its own people, to me is some of the worst kinds of injustice that you can find, like imaginable. And so we really need to put up a fight against that.
It's a captured government. As is Trudeau. He's Rutte's boy. Mark Rutte here, Prime Minister
of
Netherlands. This is a captured country. The government is captured. It cannot exist with this government. I mean, this government is captured by the WEF. They call it the WEF here, right? And the WEF and the CCP are co-sanguinated. I used to look at them as cooperating, but it's very clear that they're so entwined that they're one at this point. Later they'll fight each other. But yeah, it's very important it's time to put your game faces on. You know what I mean? It's time to stop negotiating. It's time to stop being polite. It's time to say, you out. And that's it. I mean, you're going out one way or the other. Or you're going to lose, and you're going to be slaves.